We are this year having the theme throughout the year of seeing the world through the eyes of God, looking at different things as God looks at them. So I want us today to introduce the April theme, and that is looking at the empty tomb. You and I need to have the same appreciation for the empty tomb that God does. There's so much uncertainty about all of the future that is around us. And it is at times like these when truth can be more easily seen. Think about how your own worldview has changed. Think about how you look at things different, things that were so important to you before, but they're no longer really important to you. That's what adversity sometimes allows us to do. It allows us to look back and see that sometimes there's nothing else that matters. See if I can illustrate that. If you or your loved one is on a ventilator or needs one, and there's no ventilator available, what really matters? To answer that question is to cause each of us to become more and more focused in these matters. You see, it's at times like this that wealth does not matter. If you need a ventilator, wealth, the fact you might have great wealth does not help you to have one if there are no ventilators available. If you have loved ones and there are no ventilators, it doesn't make any difference how rich you are. It doesn't make any difference what earthly accomplishments you have attained. It doesn't make any difference. Every person is equal at a time like this. Doesn't make any difference if you're on the Forbes list of the top 10 billionaires in the world. Future kings have been infected. Prime ministers have been infected. Senators have been infected. And while it has not happened, perhaps presidents or house leaders could be infected. We are all equal at a time like this. And it's at times like this that we will be able to see those things that truly matter. I want us today to look at that empty tomb because that's what matters. I want us to have an appreciation of this tomb that we have never had before, perhaps. And I want us to understand that there is a reason for the faith that we have in this empty tomb. If you and I were able to be transported back to that time of the day of the resurrection, we would not be surprised that the tomb is empty. There were those who were surprised, those who did not understand it. But if there is validity to our faith, when we walked up and the stone was rolled away, perhaps we came a day or two after that resurrection time, we would not be surprised that stone was no longer there. But is that a dream? Is there any basis for our faith? I want us today to talk about that empty tomb. And then as a result of that, I want us to make the applications to our faith and of our faith to our lives to help us understand these are things that really, really matter. If you're gathered at home, you might want to pick up your Bible and look in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. If your children are there in the room with you right now, you might want to get them to come over and look at these verses in the Bible and point out the things that are found in the Scriptures. We'll not have time to look at all of the first 10 or 11 verses, but every one of them is in focus with what we're about to say. Look at what the text says. Moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which you have received, and in which you stand. You look down in verse 3, and Paul says, I have received that gospel. And that gospel, that good news which I have received, I came and I taught it to you. And you received that gospel. It was preached among you. And it was received by you. And then he says of this gospel, it is that by which you are saved. The "are saved" in the present tense is indicative of the fact that something had happened in the past, and there was that time, there was that occasion which God saved them. And he says, this gospel that I have proclaimed to you, this gospel that you have believed, is the very basis of your salvation. You understand? You were saved when you obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ, and you are still saved. You are as much saved today, if you are a child of God, a faithful child of God, as you were the day that you obeyed the gospel. And then he points out the fact that faith cannot be blind faith. In fact, look at verse 3 whenever he says, verse 2 when he says, that which I preached unto you, unless you believed in vain. You see, it's important for us to have our own faith. It's so easy growing up in the church to believe things because it's what we've always heard. We've sat in Sunday school classes all of our lives. But you and I need to understand and make the examination, is this really a fairy tale? Is there reality to this death and burial and resurrection story? And a part of the challenge of this lesson is to challenge every one of those of us who've been in the faith for so many years, and those who are young, perhaps those children that are in the very room with you. Young people, you need to examine this with the depths of your soul and walk away that I am going to be saved by this gospel unless it is a fairy tale, unless your faith is vain. But look at what Paul says in the fact that your faith may not be in vain. It is not a blind faith. And it's at this point in this passage that Paul takes another direction whenever he talks about a death and a burial and a resurrection of Jesus. It's not a blind thing. It's something that really, really happened. But could you look with me particularly at verse 3? I delivered unto you first of all. It's interesting. Those who read the Greek New Testament would see in this that which we do not readily see. When we think of first of all, it may be just a series of things that are of no consequence or another. Like a parent might say to a child, here, I want you to clean your room, and I want you to carry the garbage out, and I would like for you to mow the lawn. It's like the wife that says to her husband, go to the grocery store and buy this and this and this, just a whole list of things. That's not what Paul says here. And that's not what the Greek says. And the readers of that Greek New Testament, when they saw that expression, first of all, they would not even think chronologically. As an individual might say, I want you to go to this store and then to this store and then to this store, and give some chronological list. It's not even a list of points that you might have in a sermon, and that's the first point I want to make is this. That's not what this Greek says. When Paul writes, first of all, the Greek phrase there means of the utmost, highest importance. And the implication is almost such that there's nothing in second place. Above every other thing, I delivered unto you. Paul, what did you deliver to us? First of all, that there was a man named Jesus who lived on this earth. I encourage young people, I encourage those who are not so young who struggle with their faith. I encourage those individuals who perhaps don't even truly believe in God. They're agnostics of some kind. I encourage you to be honest enough to treat the man Jesus like you treat every man of history. What do you know about George Washington? What do you know about Napoleon? What do you know about Columbus? It's not that you knew them personally. There was no way that could have happened. Why do you believe all those stories? Why do you believe all of these things that you read about in history? Because there are historical records, many of them written contemporaneously with those individuals who lived at that time. And I encourage you to treat Jesus like you treat every man of history. You see, the gospel is that Christ died. That's verse 3. The gospel is that this Jesus who died was buried. And the gospel is that he was raised from that, and then the statement that he was seen. First by Cephas, and then through the next several verses, on occasion after occasion after occasion, he was seen. But is that a fairy tale? Is this just something some individual wrote maybe in the 3rd or 4th or 5th century? Is it something that is, well, after a man's been dead so many years, there are fables that come up, there are stories that develop about them? What about these stories about Jesus? Look again at this text. This story about the death of Jesus is according to the Scriptures, not New Testament Scriptures, for they had not yet been written. The death of Jesus was that which was there according to Old Testament Scriptures. Go all the way back and read the Jewish Scriptures, and over and over and over again you read about the coming of this Messiah. And even his death is foretold, the very nature of his death. In Jewish Scriptures, those who never ever have believed in Jesus Christ as a nation, those individuals who've given to us the Jewish Scriptures, talk about the fact that he would be betrayed by a friend for 30 pieces of silver. Not a bone would be broken. That's according to the Scriptures. See, the evidence that this really happened is not something that originates in the 1st century or even 2nd century A.D. Go all the way back to the Old Testament Scriptures. In the Old Testament Scriptures, you will read that he died and that he was buried. Are you aware that the Old Testament Scriptures talked about the thieves on the cross? And about the borrowed tomb in which Jesus was laid, the tomb of the rich man and those thieves? Are you aware the Old Testament Scriptures, Jewish Scriptures, those who had no belief in Jesus, those individuals said, and when he comes, he'll die, and in his death, these are the things that are going to happen. That he'll be buried. And the Old Testament Scripture says, and that he will be raised from the dead. You will not leave, the book of Psalms says, in reference to Jesus prophetically speaking, you will not leave my soul in the Hadean world. Neither will you allow my flesh to decay. That's Jewish Scriptures. This is not something that you find written in the 2nd century A.D., some individuals tried to explain away the reality that a man named Jesus lived on this earth. It was all according to the Scriptures. Scriptures written by those who, as a nation, did not believe in Him. There is evidence. There is evidence. Now then, we know those Old Testament Scriptures. If I ask you, what's the greatest commandment? You remember in Matthew 22, they came and asked Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Talk about those things that are first. What, of all of those commands in the Old Testament, what's the greatest commandment of the Old Testament law? And that is to love the Lord your God. And to love your neighbors yourself is that second commandment. What is the first, not a commandment, but what is first above every other thing? What is first of all of the New Testament? That Jesus died, and that Jesus was buried, and that He was raised from the dead. Think for a moment of this man of history and look at the claims that he made. When you get to the end of the New Testament, there is that affirmation that those writers of the New Testament say, He was there at the creation. Are you aware? There's a man of history that lived on this earth that said He was there in the beginning when all this world was created. Are you aware that he claimed that He was God in the flesh, that He was Emmanuel? Are you aware there's a man who's lived on this earth that has made that claim, I am God in the flesh, I am deity, I am, John chapter 5 and verse 28, I am God in the flesh, I am the Son of God, I'm equal with God. That's a man of history. That man of history says, I am King of all of the kings. I'm the Lord of all of the lords. And that man of history says, and I am your Lord of all mankind. I'm the Lord of everybody that's lived on this earth. And make that personal. Here is that man that claims He is your Lord. He has all authority, and He has authority over you. You know what he claimed? This man of history says, I am the only way anybody can ever go to heaven. What do you do with all of these claims? I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes unto the Father except by me. John chapter 14, verse 6. That's a historical record of what he claimed. Let me ask you, do you realize that any crazy person could make this claim? Several years ago, in a gospel meeting in the Church of Christ in one of the Australian cities, a man arrived as they were assembled, dressed in a white robe, longer hair, and a beard, and he walked in and said, "Stop the service, I have returned." He claimed he was Jesus. Man's crazy. Any crazy person could make that claim. Any person that is mentally imbalanced could say, I'm the Son of God, I am deity. I was there when Abraham was there. I was there in the flood. I was there, and go all the way through, and I was there. Any crazy person could make that claim. You see, he doesn't know any better. But there are those individuals, those people who sell the snake oil, the modern day televangelist, who have found an avenue to become popular and to gain wealth. They know they're lying, and yet they claim it. You see, Jesus, maybe he wasn't crazy. Maybe he was an individual who's trying to maneuver history and trying to make all of these things fall out and fall in place. Maybe he is this individual who willfully is lying for his own personal gain. Could I point out, having said that, there was no personal gain that became his. His claims cost him his life. But if he didn't know better, if he's crazy, or if he's a liar, I ask you to look at this man of history, and I want to ask you, is Jesus a lunatic? When you read the historical record of a man who lived on this earth, is he a lunatic? Is he a liar? If he's not a lunatic and if he's not a liar, then the only alternative is he's the Lord. I ask you to treat Jesus Christ as a man of history. The reality is, every one of us faces the exact same problem that the Jewish leaders faced in the first century. We know that he died. Those Jewish leaders said, we maneuvered all the situation so that he would be crucified, and we know that he died. And we know that the tomb was empty. The very problem that they faced is the problem that every person must face, and that is, when they went to the tomb, where's the body? Where's his body? You see, if he really is everything that he claimed to be, if he's really God in the flesh, then he must have power over that which every mortal who's ever lived on this earth has been subjected to, and that is death. Even those few people who were raised from the dead in biblical times died again. Death is more powerful than every person that's ever lived on this earth, except, first of all, he died, he was buried, and he was raised triumphant over death. To make application, I challenge every one of you to understand that there is no such thing in relationship to Jesus as blind faith. He was seen after he was resurrected. At the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, let every word be established. And over 500 people saw the resurrected Jesus. In the first century, assemble the court, bring 500 different witnesses and then more. And over again said, I saw them. Thomas, did you really see him? I said, I'm not going to believe unless I can see the nail prints. I'm not going to believe. And I'll tell you what I saw. I saw my Lord. I saw my God. I challenge you, if you're trying to build your own faith, to understand God does not ask you to close down your brain and just blindly accept whatever might be said. There's evidence according to the Scriptures. And there's evidence in that which is first of all, above every other thing, he died and he was buried and that he raised again. You cannot be honest and fail to answer the question, what happened to his body? I challenge all of you, young and old, and those who may be troubling and struggling with their faith, I challenge you to be as honest with this man as you would of every other man of history. What happened to that body? Two facts can be established. He died, and the tomb was empty. The great question is, where is his body? I challenge you again to understand the force that if he is not a lunatic or a liar, then he is the Lord, and that fact that he is the Lord changes every value that you have. We began this lesson by talking about how crisis and situations like this cause us to really see the true value. That value is not going to be found in physical things. The riches, notoriety, to use biblical words, the flesh, the eyes, the pride of life, that's not where the values are found. The fact he was raised gives value to the church. He died and shed his blood to purchase the church. You know the value of the church? It's the value of Emmanuel, God in the flesh, who came and died and was buried and rose again. It's times like this that the resurrected Jesus helps us understand the value of our own souls. What's a man profited if he gained the whole world and loses his own soul? What is the profit? I challenge you to understand the value of the souls of others, the value of the souls of your children. And I challenge every parent to look at those children that you have and think of the value of their souls. And of family members or friends or even people we have not yet met, but we may meet as a result of this very crisis. What's the value of the soul? What if a man gained the whole world? I Googled and asked the question, what is this world worth if I possessed it all? The real estate, all of the land of all of the nations, $110 trillion. The value of all the monetary things, businesses and all the private industry and all of the banks, $180 trillion. Nearly $300 trillion does not have the value of your soul or the souls of those around you. And in times like this, the value of worship. We are assembled here in this building, very few in number. But on the internet, there are people who are watching, who have this day been a part of worshiping with us and are a part of worshiping with us right now. You know the value of that cup and that bread that you just partook of. It's all that matters. First of all, that cup, that bread is the gospel in the bread that we eat and the cup that we drink. And the value of worship in spite of the fact it's unusual circumstances, and the value of becoming a child of God. You and I need to have an appreciation that even in times like this, there are those who are lost and those who need to obey the gospel. And if you're not a Christian today, why would you not make that decision? Why would this not be an opportune time perhaps for you to call family members and say, I'm concerned about the fact that I may die or you may die. There's just something we need to talk about. Why would you not see the value of obedience to the gospel? That gospel plan of salvation is obvious. It's faith in Jesus. It's the repenting of our sins, the confessing of our faith, and being baptized into Christ. You could be baptized this day and become a child of God. Young person, have you heard this lesson? And would you not evaluate what has been said? Those who are not so young, those whose faith may be wavering, would you not see the value of all of that? Because the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus gives us the road of salvation and the hope of heaven, because we are part of the church, and it shows the importance of us living faithfully until the day that we die. Think about this lesson and pray about it, and let us know if there's any way we can help you in relationship to these very things we've talked about this day. There's a great thought that all of us need to carry with us as this service comes to an end, and that is, God will take care of you. Let's sing that together.